Good morning, students. I am Riya Sinha, your assistant teacher. Today, we are going to start chapter number 9 of history, that is Vital Villages and Thriving Towns. Vital Villages. In this topic, we will discuss about different types of villages which were set up in the earlier times. And after that, we will discuss about thriving towns, how towns were set up and how people used to engage themselves or migrated from villages to towns. So let's start the chapter. Your first topic is iron tools and agriculture. In this topic, we will discuss about how people used to make iron tools and how they have started agriculture. See, we often take the use of iron for granted today. Things made of iron and steel are a part of our daily lives. The use of iron began in the subcontinent around 3000 years ago. Some of the largest collections of iron tools and weapons were found in the megalithic burials, about which you have already read in the previous chapter. So basically, today we take it for granted the use of iron tools, but things made of iron are part of our daily lives now. The use of iron basically began around 3000 years ago, and some of the largest collection of iron tools and weapons were found in the megalithic burials. So around 2500 years ago, there is evidence for the growing use of iron tools, and these included axes for clearing forests and the iron plowshare. So as we have seen, the plowshare was useful for increasing agricultural production. We know why plowshare are used in agriculture, because it it is helpful in tilling and plowing the field, and because of plowing, the fertility of the soil gets increased, and we used to get a lot of production because of that. Okay, see, other steps to increase production. Irrigation. The kings and kingdoms you have been reading about could not have existed without the support of flourishing villages. While new tools and the system of transplantation increased production, irrigation was also used. Obviously, kings and kingdoms basically could not have existed without the support of flourishing village. So, new tools and system of transplantation increased production, and because of that, irrigation was also used. So, irrigation works that were built during this time included canals, wells, tanks, and artificial lakes. So, basically, these were the uh, appropriate types of things which are used in production. Sorry, irrigation. So, if you look at the chart, you will find that some of the stages in the construction of irrigation works are mentioned. See, who lived in the villages? There were at least three kinds of people living in most villages in the southern and northern part of the subcontinent. In the Tamil region, large landowners were known as Vellalar, ordinary plowmen were known as Uzavar, and landless laborers, including slaves, were known as Kadesiar and Adimai. You all have to learn these terms. Vellalar means large landowners, Uzavar, ordinary plowmen, and landless laborers and slaves were known as Kadaisiyar or Adimai. So, in the northern part of the country, the village headman was known as the Gram Pujak. Usually, men from the same family held the position for generations, and in other words, the post was hereditary because from the same family, one after the another generation took over the charge. The Gram Pujak was often the largest landowner. Generally, he had slaves and hired workers to cultivate the land. And besides, as he was powerful, the king often used him to collect taxes from the village. He also functioned as a judge and sometimes as a policeman. So these are the functions of Gram Pujak. Gram Pujak was often largest landowner. He had slaves and hired workers to cultivate the land. He was powerful. The king used him to collect taxes from the village, and sometimes he functioned as judge and sometimes as policeman. So apart from the Gram Bhojak, there were other independent farmers known as Grihpatis, and most of whom were smaller landowners. And then there were men and women such as the Das, Karmakar, who did not own land and had to earn a living working on the fields owned by others. So in most villages there were also some craftspersons such as blacksmith, potter, carpenter and weaver. Now the earliest Tamil composition. Some of the earliest works in Tamil known as Sangam literature were composed around 2300 years ago. These texts were called Sangam because they were supposed to have been composed and compiled in assemblies, and that's why known as Sangam, means compilation, of poets that were held in the city of Madurai. The Tamil terms mentioned above are found in Sangam literature. Okay, so basically, the earliest Tamil composition known as Sangam literature, and it was composed around 2300 years ago. It was known by the name of Sangam because they were supposed to have been composed and compiled in assemblies of poets that were held in the city of Madurai. Okay, now let's continue the chapter. Next topic is finding out about cities, stories, travelers, sculpture, and archaeology. You may have heard of Jataks. These were stories that were probably composed by ordinary people and then written down and preserved by Buddhist monks. Here is a part of Jatak story which tells us how a poor man gradually became rich. See, see this story. A clever poor man. Once upon a time there was a clever poor young man who lived in a city. His only resource was a dead rat. He started off by selling it for a coin to a hotel for their cat. Then one day there was a storm. The king's garden was littered with branches and leaves, and the gardener was at a loss as to how to clear the mess. The young man offered to clean the garden if he could keep the wood and leaves. The gardener agreed at once. The young man rounded up all the children who were playing with an offer of sweets for every stick and leaf that they could collect. In no time, every scrap had been neatly piled near the entrance. Just then the king's potter was on the lookout for fuel with which to bake his pots. So he took the whole lot and paid the young man for it. Our young man now thought of another plan. He carried a jar full of water to the city gate and offered water to 500 grass cutters. They were pleased and said, "You have done us a good turn. Now tell us, what can we do for you?" He replied, "I will let you know when I need your help." He then made friends with a trader. One day, the trader told him, "Tomorrow a horse dealer is coming to town with 500 horses." Hearing this, our young man went back to the grass cutters. He said, "Please give me a bundle of grass each and don't sell your grass till mine is sold." They agreed and gave him 500 bundles of grass. When the horse dealer could not buy grass anywhere else, he purchased the young man's grass for 1,000 coins. So we can use. So this is the story basically given. It is shown that how a person mentioned in the story used his mind and got several opportunities to survive in this brutal world. So we can use other kinds of evidence to find out about life in some of these early cities. Sculptures, carved scenes depicting people living in towns and villages as well as in the forest. Many of these sculptures were used to decorate railings, pillars, and gateways of buildings that were visited by people. Many of the cities that developed from about 2500 years ago were capitals of Mahajanpads. As we had seen, some of these cities were surrounded by massive fortification walls. In many cities, archaeologists have found rows of pots or ceramic rings arranged one on top of the other, and these are known as ring wells. These seem to have been used as toilets in some cases and as drains and garbage dumps. These ring wells are usually found in individual houses. We have hardly any remains of palaces, markets, or of homes of ordinary people. Perhaps some are yet to be discovered by archaeologists. Others, made of wood, mud bricks, and thatch, may not have survived. Another way of finding out about early cities is from the accounts of sailors and travelers who visited them. And one of the most detailed accounts that had been found was by an unknown Greek sailor. He described all the ports he visited. Now, see the story of Bargyas and the Greek name for Baruch. Barikaza was basically the Greek name for Baruch only. The gulf is very narrow at Barigaza and very hard to navigate for those coming from the sea. Ships had to be steered in by skillful and experienced local fishermen who were employed by the king. The imports in Barigaza were wine, copper, tin, lead, coral, topaz, cloth, gold, and silver coins. Exports from the town included plants from the Himalayas, ivory, agate, carnelian, cotton, silk, and perfumes. Special gifts were brought by merchants for the king, and these included vessels of silver, singing boys, beautiful women, fine wines, and fine clothes. So, this is the story of Baruch. So, let's continue the topic. Next topic is coins. You may have noticed how wealth is measured in terms of coins in this story. So, archaeologists have found several thousands of coins belonging to this period. The earliest coins, which were in use for about 500 years, were punch marked coins, such as the one shown in this picture. Other means of exchange. So basically, at that time, coins were used because we can say that because archaeologists have found several thousands of coins belonging to this period. There were other means of exchange also, like see a short poem from the Sangam collection. as they carry the white paddy of their land to exchange it for the salt of another, crossing the long roads in carts through sand white as moonlight, taking whole families who hate to be left behind. The departure of the salt merchants leaves the city empty. Salt was produced plentifully along the sea coast. So basically, here it is shown in the poem that white paddy of their land, they are going to exchange it for with the salt. So at that time, when some commodities are also exchanged uh, in response of uh, in exchange of another commodities. So if you wanted to take paddy, then uh, you have to exchange it with some other commodity. See, cities with many functions. Next topic. Very often, a single town was important for a variety of reasons. Mathura has been an important settlement for more than 2500 years. It was important because it was located at the crossroads of two major routes of travel and trade, from the northwest to the east and from the north to south. Mathura is a very unique place because of its mythological stories also, and they were important settlement for more than 2500 years. It was important because of its location also, because it was located at the crossroads of two major routes of travel and trade, from the northwest to the east and from north to south. So there were fortifications around the city and several shrines. Farmers and herders from adjoining areas provided food for people in the city. Mathura was also a center where some extremely fine sculpture was produced. So, around 2000 years ago, Mathura became the second capital of the Kushans, about whom you will read in the next chapter. Mathura was also a religious center, and there were Buddhist monasteries, Jain shrines, and it was an important center for the worship of Krishna, according to Hindu mythological stories. So, several inscriptions on the surfaces, such as stone slabs and statues, have been found in Mathura. Generally, these are short inscriptions recording gifts made by men and sometimes women also to monasteries and shrines. These were made by kings and queens, officers, merchants, and craftspersons who lived in the city. And for instance, inscriptions from Mathura mention goldsmiths, blacksmiths, weavers, basket makers, garland makers, perfumers. Okay, so hope you all understood all the covered topics well. Read the chapter properly and try to understand it well. Thank you. Have a nice day.